Hello, web programming students. Welcome to week 10. So this week we're going to talk about graceful degradation and progressive enhancement. So what is graceful degradation? It is the practice of building a web functionality so that it provides a certain level of user experience in more modern browsers, but will also degrade gracefully to a lower level of user experience in older browsers. So think about an escalator. When it breaks down, it becomes stairs. It's still usable. So think of modern browsers as a working escalator, but older browsers are like just stairs. So if any of you thought of Mitch Hedberg, good for you. Otherwise, I'll talk about him in a future cultural reference of the week. The lower level is not as nice to use as for your site visitors, but it does provide them with the basic functionality that they came to your site to use. So anyone at this level can use the site, but at more advanced browsers, more modern browsers, they have a little more of a fun experience, I guess. So when should you use graceful degradation? If you have to retrofit old code and you don't have the time or money to replace it, you may want to do some graceful degradation. One example of this is an edge case where maybe you have a very high traffic site where every millisecond of performance means a difference of millions of dollars and you don't have the time to rewrite your code, then you may do some graceful degradation things like strip away some functionality. Or website is so dependent on JavaScript, that is to say it's very interactive, and other scripts that it makes more sense to maintain a basic version rather than enhancing one with that's like has maps or email clients or feed readers, something like that. So that's when you would think about doing graceful degradation. Websites don't break at these lower levels, so you have to make sure that anyone can use it at the lower level, the older browser level. So make sure your site doesn't break. Is graceful degradation still a good idea? Well, it is, because even though graceful degradation is taken a negative connotation, and that negative connotation comes from making users aware of the shortcomings, it's still important for making resilient, fault-tolerant systems. So it is a necessary tool sometimes. But we're not going to talk about or do any graceful degradation. We're going to do the opposite and focus on that. Just to put it another way, graceful degradation is like a fallback approach that fills in the gap created by a lack of browser support or some kind of failure. So hopefully you won't have to do much graceful degradation, but at least I've exposed you to this concept. In short, graceful degradation starts with the best experience and then pares down for older browsers and devices and such. What we're going to focus on is progressive enhancement. So what is progressive enhancement? We start by establishing a basic level of user experience that all browsers will be able to provide when you render the website, but then you build in more advanced functionality. It'll automatically be available to browsers that can use it. So this is like graceful degradation in reverse. So you start with a good level and then you add better stuff. This approach starts from a very basic working example and allows for constant extension for future environments. The lower level works for everybody. Most browsers and devices, old and new, different environments and abilities. But when you start to have new browsers or a new browser extension becomes widely adopted, you can enhance your experience yet to another level without having to touch the original solution. With graceful degradation, you have to revise the original solution. So this is a way to build on current code without having to change the code. At least changing the HTML, that is, the content. So when we talk about progressive enhancement, our starting point is the content, which is the peanut of the peanut M&M, not the browser. So we're thinking of content strictly. We start with the content, which is this peanut, and then we wrap some style around it. That's the chocolate. And then the interactivity, the JavaScript part, that's the candy coating of the HTML of the peanut M&M. Progressive enhancement is something for everyone, then. People that like peanuts enjoy the core of a peanut M&M, but the chocolate is an enhancement. And then the candy coating part is yet another enhancement. So that's progressive enhancement in a nutshell. Progressive enhancement versus graceful degradation, they're really just opposite approaches to get to the same result, which is a robust experience for your user. It's often explained as how to write code without relying on JavaScript. This is more relevant back in the day when browsers didn't have as much support for JavaScript, but it's less of an issue now because browsers these days have much better support for JavaScript, and it isn't much of a problem, at least in our country. It might be different in countries that have more limited bandwidth. So why do we do this? Why do we talk about and use progressive enhancement? Well, as the web continues to scale and improve, our goal as designers should maintain high levels of accessibility and openness. And we can do this with progressive enhancement. So what kind of code would you do to make your sites progressively enhanced? One way is to use CSS prefixes. These are a way to create fallbacks in case a new CSS property is not supported in all browsers. There's some little code we'll add to our CSS to help it along in these browsers. And we'll do a couple of examples of this. In Internet Explorer 8, which is still out there somewhere, maybe not here in this country, but in places with less advanced technology, RGBA colors aren't supported in Internet Explorer 8. So a fallback would be just 000 here, this hex number. So a browser will read down from top to bottom, get to here, they'll say, okay, we'll do this color. And then they'll go to the next one, since this is the same here. They'll try to use the lower one, the bottommost one. And in Internet Explorer 8's case, it doesn't know how to use this, so it'll go back to this color here. More likely, you would use a prefix to handle new CSS properties. So CSS properties will come out more in new ones that browsers are catching up to support. And so back in the day, Flexbox wasn't as widely supported. And so we had to write some of these prefixes so that a browser that didn't fully support Flexbox could support Flexbox. I won't get into the technical browser backend stuff, but in our CSS, we'd have to add these prefixes. And we had to add all of these usually because this was for like Safari and Chrome, and this was for Firefox, and this was for Internet Explorer. So we had to include all of these just to make sure you had all your major browsers covered. So before Flexbox was widely supported, we'd have to add all of these prefixes, and there were other ones for other browsers like Opera was dash or -o. So browsers with partial support would render this content properly because we've accounted for all the other major browsers. And like I said before, it bears repeating, the browser moves down the list until it found one it supported and then executes that style. So remember, browsers read CSS from top to bottom. So whatever is last and supported is shown in the browser. So as long as it finds something it likes, it'll run with that. And the order is important. You should put the real property last. I won't get into the technical back and forth about that, but suffice it to say, if you have to use a prefix, they usually go first, and then your last line should be the real CSS property. So let's go do some. So here we're back with our kid drinking the soda. I've added some text here because we're going to do a demonstration of when to use a prefix. And then we will make this image fluid so we can do a little more responsive web design stuff. So right now, if I squeeze this in, it's not responsive at all. So we can do some different things to get this to be responsive. So if I take this into Atom. All right. So here's my code for that page we just saw. This was back here. I've added some text. You'll have this code in Canvas. So I've added an H1 here. We're going to talk about that. And then we'll go into our CSS. So first, let's talk about making this image responsive. Right now, it doesn't respond to anything, so we can do some things to change this up. So before we get into that stuff, I'm going to take all of this and comment it out. Again, I highlighted it and did Command/ or Control/ if you're on Windows, because I want to show you this without all of this margin and border stuff. So if I just save this and refresh my browser, this is what it looks like. And so I wanted it still to be in the center. It's still not responsive, but I'm going to go fix that. So the next thing I want to do, so now that I've commented it out, I want to start using some CSS to control the size and fluidity of that image. So the first thing I want to do is decide that I want a max width on that picture. So no matter what happens, the width of this image will be 50% of the width of my section here. So this image here is part of the section. I want a max width of 50%. And I also want to do a height auto, because otherwise it would start to skew and get warped. And so I don't want it to do that. I can also add a max height just so it doesn't exceed the size of my section here. So I will have this at 100% so that it's not going to be any taller than the section that it's living in. So I'll save this and show you what that looks like at this moment. 3, 2, 1, refresh. And now it's not any bigger than 50%. One thing I should have done is go back here. And then originally it had this width of 380. And so this width would override the CSS width. So I'm going to just delete this so that we can control this height without having it locked into a fixed number. So if I just quick refresh this, now it's gone a little bit bigger. It's not any bigger than this section here because the max height is 100%. And it can't get any bigger than 50% width, but right now it can't, so that's all right. And so we can move this, but doesn't really change. So if you want to see this a little bit better, we can go in Chrome at least to inspect. So if I right click, inspect, we can use and click on this button so that it's this icon so that's responsive. We can do the responsive thing here, and then we can move this in and out. Show you what this looks like. If you remember from last week, we put in some media queries so that it would change the color of the background depending on the size. And so as you can see, our picture isn't getting much bigger than 50% because it's just too locked into this max height of 100%. So that's fine. But I do want to get this in the center. And so we can go back to our code here. Margin 0, auto is how you center something like this because we have widths established. But if I do that, 3, 2, 1, refresh, it doesn't put it in the center. The last thing we need to do is display block. And now it'll act like a block 3, 2, 1, refresh. And now it's in the center like I want it. And it's nice and responsive. It maintains 100% width because that's how it maxes out. Here, max height 100. It doesn't get any bigger than 50%, although here it doesn't look like it ever gets back past 50% width, but still maintains fluidity. So that's nice. Now, the next thing we'll show you is this demo of clipping text. So what we can do is clip the text of this text here to the purple color, like you would do like in Photoshop. So to do our clipping text here, and this will be a demonstration of CSS prefixes. What I have here is this H1 that lives inside of this header. And so we can add some code to the header CSS so that it clips that text like a background clip. So if I go up here to my header, now the CSS property we want to use is called background clip text. So by itself, it won't do anything because in Chrome, well, it's 3, 2, 1, refresh, nothing happens because we can go to caniuse.com and see that background clip text in Chrome, it's supported with a prefix. You can see that here. The little yellow box around WebKit is what we need to add to background clip text for it to work. And there also is one more thing we need to add, which is color transparent so that we can see the clip behind it. So by itself, these two by itself won't get it done. If I show you in the browser, 3, 2, 1, refresh, it's transparent, but it doesn't clip the background to it. So the last thing we need to do is go up here. Again, our prefix goes before the real property. So I'll save this. And if this works properly, then you won't see the background except for it being clipped in the text. So 3, 2, 1, refresh. And here we go. That's now clipped to this text here. Again, you see this background color like it was before. And so we have a properly clipped text using this prefix. So that is how you write a prefix and pair it up with the real CSS property. So in the future, probably in the next few months or so, we won't need this prefix. We can just use background clip text. But in this interim time, you can add this prefix here. And again, you can go to caniuse.com for this new stuff, and then you can check different browsers to see if it's supported. So in Firefox, it's supported completely without any prefixes. You don't need that, but you'll need to add prefixes for other browsers. So if you're using Microsoft Edge, the WebKit prefix is fine. If you're using Firefox, no need for prefixes. Chrome, you need the WebKit prefix. For Safari, you need the WebKit prefix. Now, WebKit is it's the engine of the browser, and so most modern browsers are built on a couple, 2 or 3 different engines. WebKit being one of the main ones. So Opera is also supported with WebKit. So there you go. Used to have more different types of prefixes, but they all seem to go on WebKit now. So that's a lot easier for you. And that is, whoops. And that's CSS prefixes and progressive enhancement.